Well, welcome everybody to the January 5th, 2023 meeting of the Election Board.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. All right, first item on the agenda is old business. Approval of minutes from the December 1st meeting.
Mr. Chair, may I announce that the minutes for the meeting are not available yet. And so I would like to make a motion to table the minutes approvals until next month's meeting with your approval.
I will second that.
All right, we call a roll.
Okay, roll call. Chairperson Garlitz.
Yes.
Board Member Henry.
Yes.
Clerk Brown.
Yes.
Motion approved, 3-0.
Wonderful. All right, under old business, we have CFA 4 filings, update from Clerk Brown and Karen Wheeler, and/or.
I am deferring.
Okay, so in your little packet that I gave you, you have 3 letters from the 3 different candidates, Ashley Pirani, Elizabeth Sensenstein, and Kate Wiltz, and they gave their reasoning to you in print why they were late. And I think that is pretty much all that you'd requested, that you wanted their acknowledgement of their lateness. And with that, then there's only one that is left, and that is Thelma Jeffries. And she had another email sent to her December 9th, which is almost a month ago. But my office has been kind of busy, and I haven't followed up on that, but she has not filed her CFA 4 that was due in October.
And
I sent an email letter that you guys had requested last time.
And can I clarify, each of these, the 3
Sure.
letters were the first time this has happened? Meaning that
Yes.
traditionally they would receive a written, or not written, I'm sorry, just we're excusing the fines, acknowledging that they were late and that this should not happen going
Correct.
forward.
I had sent them an email letter and asked them to either come to the meeting today or send us a written email for the election board to explain, excuse me, why they were late. And since it is their first offense, they just basically get a warning, what they have been given, and then you forgive them of the fine, which I think you probably, I don't know if you did that last board meeting or you were waiting for this response.
So for these 3, I am happy to make a motion that per our agreed upon policy, we will forgive the waiver for the fines for these first time filers, and serves as notice to not have it happen going forward.
I'll second.
Roll call. Chairperson Garlitz.
Yes.
Board Member Henry.
Yes.
And Clerk Brown.
Yes,
Motion approved, 3-0.
thank you. I'm also hopeful we can address, we announced someone's name on last month's meeting that we should not have. We were told, the board was advised that their filing was late. They were able to prove that they sent it in. In an email I received, they felt that their name had been slandered because we mentioned it publicly and they were notified by the press. And you were able to confirm that that person did in fact submit
Yes.
their report on file. So there's no way to say anything that will make your name feel less slandered. But certainly I individually, if not on behalf of the board, want to apologize to that candidate because we had the list of people who were late. We addressed the names that were on it, and it should not have happened. And so I sincerely apologize to that candidate, who's now elected. Actually, they took their office on Sunday.
And so what do we want to do with Thelma Jeffries?
So I think for point of clarification, that candidate, the initial tardiness was the first offense, correct?
Say that again.
The tardiness on this filing was their first offense?
It was her second, but that was in the primary, and the board really, we had some really strange things happening here. We had a meeting that ended up to be canceled. They were invited, and then it was canceled. I don't remember why, but, and it was kind of a mess. And so we had several people that were late, but it wasn't really their fault. So it's kind of a soft first late one. And I mean,
Okay, so then my suggestion would be just to, and the rest of the board can comment and feel free to make a motion however they feel, but treat this just as a first offense, and then I think we can go into, under new business, we have some policy discussions regarding these tardy filings. So I think we could just go from there. That would be my.
okay.
Chairman, if I may make a comment. So I just as clarification to me, so with Ms. Jeffries, has she actually turned in the CFAs for October?
No,
So that's the second round of not turning in CFAs.
she did do the pre-primary. It was 9 days late, but again, it was,
Well, I understand the externalities.
okay.
But I'm just
but
saying.
I don't
so
have it.
Something happened, it got in late, something happened, we have a late one, it's still not in, and there's still no communication from the candidate?
So it's not been turned in yet. I do not have the CFA 4.
Okay. While I agree with the chairman that, yeah, in the future, with future election cycles, we definitely want to have something more concrete to measure against. And I think that makes sense moving forward for 23. For this one, I mean, if we don't have the CFA yet and we're still awaiting a response from the candidate to your emails, I don't think we can take any action until the next meeting on this particular one. And we'd have to hopefully see the candidate come in and explain the circumstance by which they didn't file on time again. That would be my view. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So I can try to get a hold of her again. I'm sure that's what you want.
That would be my recommendation.
Sure.
And I have some suggestions along those lines during the new business section. So I'd be happy to entertain a motion on how to handle this one at this point, just so it's on the record.
I would make a motion that we suspend action on this particular CFA until next meeting and hopefully hear from the candidate. But so I would motion that we table a decision on that CFA until the next meeting.
I will second the motion.
Chairperson Garlitz,
Yes.
Board Member Henry.
Yes.
Clerk Brown.
Yes.
Motion approved, 3-0.
Okay, next item on the agenda is new business. And the first item under new business is updates from Karen and/or Nicole. Clerk Brown.
Thank you. The update that I want to talk about, because we certainly missed you last month, is we had a very successful election conference in Indianapolis. I took the liberty of bringing back the PowerPoints and presentations, copies for you both, so that you could see what was discussed relative to the municipal elections for which candidate filing is now open and underway. Very informative, always very helpful, reminding you of things that you might have forgotten since the last municipal. So very, very good conference. Kind of came, of course, at the time where we had a very public recount. So half of my staff was at the conference and half were here for the recount. But so you missed a good conference, but hopefully that will serve as some helpful reference tips as we navigate our way through this upcoming election. And I would then defer to Ms. Karen for the results or reporting out, unless you wanted to do it, Mr. Henry, regarding the recount, the results of the recount.
I would defer to Karen on the actual numbers that I'm sure she has in front of her. But if you have the precision, I'll take it from Karen. Thanks.
Okay. So our last one was the Benton Township Board, and we had Judge Eric Allen from Greene County, and he oversaw that. And we had that done in our office pretty much, it would have been one day, but we ended up getting closed that day because of bad weather. The end result was that Jake Dodds still won. He had a lead of 4, and it was marked down to 3, but so he still won. Everything was held in place in regards to that. And yeah, it was the 2 recounts were very different, how the local one was run versus the state. And so on the state, which is the District 62 representative between Penny Githens and Dave Hall still kept his title as representative from District 62. It included 3 counties, Olive Branch County, I believe 3 precincts from Jackson County, and 29 precincts from Monroe, which was like 18,500 ballots. I'm rounding that up or off there. It went incredibly well. Also, they started on a Tuesday around 3:30, finished around 6 or 7 that night, and then they reconvened the next day and finished on Wednesday, and they were expecting to finish on Friday and maybe even run into Monday. So it went extremely well. We had a lot more people working on that one. And the end result there too, I believe at the beginning, Penny was behind by 40 votes. And with the end, it was it 74? 74 vote difference so Dave Hall won by 74 votes there. Of course, that didn't all come from Monroe County, and so it was between the 3 counties. But it was pretty fascinating to see how it's all done and the precision and all the things that go into it. It was worth watching. Hopefully we never have to do it again, but we learned a lot. Yeah, it was quite a thing. Can you think of any questions that you might want to ask?
I do. Do you have a breakdown of the votes that were altered? Well, not altered, were readjusted, I guess is a better word, and where those were derived from, perhaps which county, and then what type of vote they were, early, election day, things like that?
Do you have that, Tree?
I'm looking.
I did not bring that with me. I am so sorry. Brown County had the most difference.
The state only gives you the grand total.
Okay.
The local one, we have the grand total. The township board, we have the grand totals. They didn't give us a breakdown.
Understood.
And if you want that as election board member, I can get you that breakdown. I want to say with Monroe County, I thought there was 12 difference, but you really have to look at the report. It's not an easy report to read.
I think she should come. Good afternoon.
So on Penny Githens, the state counted 10,615. We reported 10,620. For Dave Hall, they counted 7,904. We counted 7,897.
So it was a swing of 5 different votes in Monroe County, correct? Is that what I'm hearing?
Difference, yes.
Well, that switched because it's the same number on both sides.
Yes.
So that would make up for a margin of 10 in the tallying, but either way. The reason I was asking is I was curious to see if these were all adjudicated ballots, manually adjudicated ballots, or ballots that were perhaps scanner errors, because I believe that 5 votes between a group of 3 folks or a group of 3 different folks or 5 different folks from the state could easily be changed.
Oh, yes.
Due to human error and or their opinion.
When the
So that's
voter-
what I was just curious
Well,
about.
when the voter scans their own ballot and they've overvoted, the scanner spits it back out and tells them that you have overvoted, and they can cast ballot as is. So that race is not counted at all. But when someone votes by mail, they don't have that opportunity. So those are the ones that the election board adjudicates on election night.
Correct.
Because the scanner picks out that vote and shows it to you guys when you're sitting together. And then you choose whether to accept that vote or let it go, reject it. When humans do it, they can look at the ballot and say, they did overvote, but look, has an arrow that says, take this one, where they can accept that one, where the scanner will not.
So my assumption would be that of the 5 votes that were changed, it's unlikely, without knowing the procedure of SBOA, in and out, it would be probably the difference in those early mail-in.
It could have been
Ballots.
also too, sometimes people, instead of filling in the straight party ticket, instead of filling in the circle, they'll fill in the icon. The scanner doesn't accept that, but when the state board was there, they made a decision to accept those.
So it could have been
It could have been
election day.
those.
Interesting.
Yes.
For the purpose of transparency, would you, and record keeping, would you announce your name and title?
Oh,
My name is Teresa Martin, and I'm the Chief Deputy of Monroe County Circuit Courts.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I did talk to the State Board of Accounts, I think it was yesterday, and it was she said it was probably most of them that they had marked the icon and not the box. And so it was an error on the voter, but when you can look at it, then the person recounting can choose, I mean, they can see that this is what they wanted, but the scanner cannot.
okay. Any other updates?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I just wanted to take a moment on this particular point and say a few words. First, I wanted to thank Clerk Brown and the staff of the election board for the recounts. It is a corner of Indiana law that is rarely executed, but when we do have a chance to do it, I think we proved that here in our county, the work was exemplary, and I think that was also recognized by the State Board of Accounts in their communication with you. So I want to thank the clerk and the staff for executing a very detailed recount in our community. As Karen had mentioned, Donovan, the 62nd was shared, of course, in other counties with Jackson and Brown County, and the experience that, at least as a petitioner, and I can speak in that capacity today as the petitioner in that case, was very different. Brown County, I think, is a cautionary tale for those of us that are working in great counties. To pay attention to what happens when a community does not house all of its election materials in one location. In Brown County, there were 17 ballots that were lost that have never been recovered, and so in that manual recount. And so as the story was told, and they trying to find every ballot to manually recount, there was a bit of a paper chase to the county commission's office, to the county council. And so I think it's a good lesson to keep in mind as we think about how to store these materials from election day onward. And as a tale for us to follow there. So again, I just want to thank this board and this clerk and this county for great work done. Thank you.
Thank you.
I also, if we're done with the recount, I also have some new business that I have several copies, maybe 6 of them, of registrations that were brought in late, but they have now been processed. And so those were gathered by someone else that they missed the deadline of when voter registration closes, and so they could not be registered, but I'm just here to tell you that they have been registered and everything is fine. And so that's just more of FYI. Also, in your little packet, I have given you the primary election hours and dates. If you see fit to approve those, also for the general election, that helps a lot. And we do have a Good Friday that is not on there. So if you're looking at the date and there's a date missing, Good Friday is in April, and we're not open as a county, and so we don't do voting on that day. And this helps with a lot of things, but the league, of course, appreciates being able to get that information out into the hands of the community. And then, of course, we can post that. So if you're willing to do that, you also, for an FYI, have the Monroe County Election Board chair schedule. Since we did switch this month, and now Donovan is being the chair, and our schedule is not exactly typical, so it's a little confusing, but you do have that in front of you. We don't want to just do it every other year, because that means either the Democrat or the Republican will always have the same elections, whether it's presidential, you don't want to get stuck with the presidential every time, or if you get the municipal, or the year that we have off, when there is no election. I also gave you the offices to be elected in 2023. And with that, I do have some discussion. I don't know who needs to decide or how it happens, but I do not know if Ellettsville or Steinsville will have an election this year. Usually they try to work it out, especially Steinsville. Right now I have one person who did file for the Ellettsville, one of the wards. If they don't have competition, sometimes then they don't have an election. But I'm not for sure how that is handled. And that leads me to another thought, because we really do need to set the polling sites. But it's hard to set the polling sites if you don't know who's having an election. Did I give you a polling site
Yes.
possibilities? It's what I have so far. Because it is a municipal, it's very different. We only have the ones that are right now on this list. It would be the city precincts. I do not have Ellettsville or Steinsville on this. So I would advise probably not to sign this, because we don't know. And then I also gave you the new current precincts for the Bloomington City Council districts, which have been redistricted. Is that the word? Redistricted? I may have made that one up. For 2023 and moving on from here. And there were some changes, and you can see them on that sheet also.
Is there any way to know when typically smaller communities like Steinsville and Ellisville would announce? I feel like in the past we've gotten correspondence indicating that there would not be an election, but I would think that by next month's board meeting, we would know that they would have let us know if they are holding elections.
You would think. If I was supposed to do something, I've been pretty captivated with the recount, and I can't say I really have done much with it, but I'm not for sure if it's my job or not.
It is not. I am not thinking that, I'm not asking for you to do so. I'm asking if there's any way to know from previous municipal years how quickly we were notified of their intent. I would think it would be before next month's meeting.
I agree. It seems, and there's differences with the town of Ellettsville and Steinsville, because one is I hope I have the right terminology, but one's a small town, and then Ellettsville is a town, and they have different rules. I kind of think that the Steinsville should have already told us, but don't hold me to that. But they have different rules of how they govern and how their elections are held. I know with Steinsville, they would need to pay us to run their election, and I know they try to avoid that, and they haven't had an election in a long time. But I know there's one that's going to be up, and there could be more than that, but one for sure.
Chairman, if I may follow up. So the last day of filing is when for the cycle?
So it started yesterday, and it's a month long, so I believe it's February 4th.
Right, and then our next meeting is the 5th of February?
3rd.
Or the 3rd. So filing would still be open, and then we would be meeting next.
True.
Right. So we wouldn't really know if Ellisville would or would not hold an election
Okay.
until
After
the
that.
March meeting, really, at the earliest of the board.
So,
So we have a little time, I think, with that.
Okay.
I guess is my point.
that sounds good to me.
I guess,
then-
and therefore, we wouldn't really be able to decide polling locations till after we know for sure that no one's running in Ellisville. So really, this is probably a conversation that gets finalized in the March meeting, would be my understanding.
And then
And
there's,
I feel like March would be too late for a May primary.
So is there a way to communicate perhaps with, I guess we're just going to have to play that by ear and kind of communicate with Ellisville to monitor very closely if they will in fact have a contested election. But the timing of that I would hate to make a decision about that while there's still potential filings going on.
Yes.
Yeah.
it does kind of piggyback on each other though, because then you need to have, the one inspector resolution for the polling site. You have to have them combined. And who's going to have a sheriff, who's not. Those are resolutions that need to be done. Also, then there needs to be the questionnaires that are sent out to the polling sites. And we try to get them back sometime in March. But I can't send them out if I don't know who's getting them. It's kind of a fun time of trying to get everything done. It seems like it's a long ways away. We don't have the election until May, but there's so many things that do have to get done ahead of time. So perhaps we could wait till February, and then maybe we need to have another meeting in between, maybe 2 weeks after that, to finalize those things so the resolutions can get signed and the questionnaires sent out to the polling sites. It's a thought.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. If there's a motion to basically table that, the setting of polling locations until our next meeting, I'm happy to make the motion to table that discussion.
I will second the motion.
All right, roll call. Chairperson Garlitz,
Yes.
Board Member Henry,
Yes.
Clerk Brown.
Yes.
Motion approved, 3-0. I have one more thing. I think that's all. Seems like there was a lot of stuff. I think this is just another FYI. I got an ordinance from Ellisville Town annexing some property. In particular, it's 6400 North Matthews Drive, and then it says West McNeely Street and 66100 West McNeely Street. Basically, I've talked to the surveyor's office in Ellisville Town, and this looks like it's all about the Cook factory. They are voluntarily wanting to be annexed into the city, or to the town, sorry. And so some of it, I do change things in SVRS for that to make sure that their property is in the town so they can vote in there, but no one in here is going to be voting, although that's not how we look at it. We always, whatever property is, we try to get that correctly into SVRS. The hard part on this one is that the West McNeely Street does not have any house number. And I think it's just the way it is. It's not the street, but it's the property. I think there's 2 pieces of property that's, I don't know, 35 acres or something that Cook owns. And so I'm doing my best to get that done. It may have to be just kind of in a holding pattern in the fact that if somebody does move into the Cook factory and wants to vote, we may have to deal with it at that time. I'm not for sure how to deal with it. I did some of it, but some of it is without a house number. SVRS doesn't work that way. Everybody has a full address.
Well, I would say I don't think we need to worry about that because it's a zoning issue. You probably cannot
Yes.
live in the Cook factory.
Yes.
That said, I think that at this point, this isn't requiring any board action, right? You're just an FYI?
I would agree,
Okay,
but I wanted you to at least understand
absolutely.
why it wasn't moved forward. One of the addresses I was able to correct, or not, to make it to be the city town, I always want to say city, it is town, my apologies. All right, so I am fine with that.
Okay. Any other updates?
I don't have any.
All right. Moving on, the board needs to discuss policy for the CFA 4 filings, and we need to really get something concrete so that we can move forward for candidates so that they know what the repercussions may or may not be for late and or lack of filing. And I'm happy to open it up for discussion from any of the board members, but I would just like to say and kind of reiterate what I've said in the past, is that I think it is important to hold candidates that are filing and potentially going to be holding public office to a standard that would not let them have 37 warnings. I'm perhaps overcritical of that, but I will stand my ground on that. So that is my opinion. I also think that we need to be concrete in our decision, which I think will be easy to do just by outlining what we decide. But I'm happy to hear any ideas on how we want to handle this. And the last thing I will say is while I respect and think it is lovely that our election office and voter reg office reminds people and calls them and emails them and writes them letters, that certainly is above and beyond the office, not just of Karen as an individual, but of anyone in the state. This office, I have done a bit of research. So I think that we perhaps either need to squash that or decide what we're going to do, and I believe that's more your prerogative as clerk to direct your office. But I think that I don't want to set a precedent that we have to do that every single time, because if in a busy season, if someone does forget, then I don't want a candidate to have the ability to come back and say, well, I didn't get a letter, but these other folks did. So that's my only stipulation there, is that I don't like that. If it's not in the law that we have to remind them, I just don't want any situation to come up where one is and one isn't by accident. That's my only concern.
I understand. If I may, for the edification of election board member Henry, and the fact that I've had several incarnations of the election board with the changes that are in and out, we do have a policy in place. And it was based upon, when I first came onto the election board, the election board member for that party would reach out to the candidate or to the party chair and let them know that the filing was late and ask them to work with that candidate. That did not work out well. Then, in an effort to be generous, because first-time candidates, of course, may or may not, even though we send out a packet that has the dates and the deadlines, they may or may not recognize that there is a penalty to not filing your CFA 4 online. And I believe in another incarnation of the election board, we wanted to give a little bit of grace, so that's where the first time you get a warning and a forgiveness of the fine, because we could start charging from 1201. And then the second warning, forgiveness and a little stronger warning. And then the third time, a partial, we could charge X amount, but we set one that was maybe a quarter of, if you could charge $1,000, then we charge $250 instead. Trying to offer grace, we don't want to discourage candidates from running. And so we got to a place where we had the policy first time, second time, third time. But this past filing season feels as though the election board was not taken seriously and or not appreciative of the courtesies of notification. So what I believe, if memory serves, we discussed in the December meeting was, looking at what Marion County does, I believe they have a little bit stricter policy. They don't really give a lot of grace. And I believe we asked for information about that so that we could discuss how they do it and if we wanted to make any changes to the very generous policy Monroe County has. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Karen, do you have that policy, our current policy, that you could read out? I think Mr. Henry would like to say something too, but.
Well, that was my question. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm also being reminded, I don't know if I said it incorrectly, but that the deadline for candidate filing is February 3rd. Is that what I said?
No.
I said 4th? So it's the 3rd.
And when's our
Because
meeting?
it is like 30 days.
Well, it's Friday the 3rd, so it's and our next convening is on the 2nd or the 9th?
2nd.
Okay, so we would be meeting before the closing of, yeah, okay.
So everything's.
Yes, the 3rd is Friday, the 2nd is Thursday. My apologies if I said it incorrectly. So you want the policy for deadlines.
General.
I believe you. I'll just keep silent.
Sorry. All right, so the first offense, no penalty. The election board wants candidates to participate in the election process and be excited. They understand that the candidate may not know all the details of financial reporting requirements, and they want to minimize the burden of this first delinquent filing. The second offense, last warning, no penalty. Third offense, 25% of the statute-defined penalty. And any offense after that, fourth and on, is 100% of the statute-defined penalty, which is $50 a day up to $1,000.
Chairman, I have some questions, if I may.
Absolutely.
So is that policy presented to the candidates when they file their paperwork as part of the folder, the candidate folder that your office provides?
Good question.
All right. And I guess while we're looking into that, is that policy posted in a public space, like the county's file system, that a candidate or the public can easily find it?
I don't think it is. We certainly can.
Well, so I guess my comments would just flow from this. I agree with the chairman that we do need to have something concrete to point to. It eases the decision-making of all of us on how these incidents occur. It also is clear to the candidates filing in our county what their expectations are to meet the mail and filing correctly and following the rule of law on their filings. So I'm in concurrence that we need something concrete to point to. I would like to see whatever we do should be written, posted, and citable so that it's easily discoverable by either both political parties or their candidates as to what the procedure is. And so having it read into the record is a good first step, but having it very findable, I think, is an important second step. In terms of the grace or fail-safes, I mean, we clearly need to make sure that the policy, if it's amended, has those, especially in the circumstance we just talked about where a candidate was contacted that they had maybe not filed on time. It was clear that they did file on time, but we need to make sure we provide a backstop for those instances where there's a mistake made by staff, and that should be included in that policy. But I will also say, too, I do think it's incumbent on our parties to educate their candidates as well. So I agree with the clerk on that, that it is part and parcel of running for office. So I guess where I would leave it is if it sounds like we need to see or work through a draft to update that document and then make that document voted on and publicly available so people can cite it. That would be my take on that. I guess my point of information question would be, how does that happen? Is that a document that's drafted by staff that we would vote on, or are we going into a work session to draft a document? How does that work typically?
We do give them a folder, a
Okay.
green folder that gives them all the information. It gives them deadlines and informs information about their signs and such. But that is not in there, which we could easily add. That would not be a hard thing. So we can do that if that's what you want.
So what I would suggest is, to your point, we do need to have some sort of document to vote on, and I don't think we can do that today. I think we should have a discussion, an open discussion about what that policy might look like, and then perhaps we can delegate one of either the 3 members or someone on staff to draft that policy, obviously using the previous one as a template in terms of clarity, for citations of law and all that good stuff. And we can just go from there and perhaps vote on it the next meeting. So do we have any suggestions for changes, or interested in leaving it alone? What might we discuss?
Well, at minimum, I think I need to see a copy of the current to stare at and draw amendments on. So without that in front of me, that's kind of hard to do today. But I think that at minimum, sharing the as is to review, and then I would suggest at the next meeting, if we have that policy and amendments that we want to propose to it, that might be the appropriate time to do it.
Perfect, and then we can perhaps vote on the fly, make those changes to the current one on the fly, vote on that, and then instead of having a draft document, having a living draft in the meeting, and then we can just go from there. Is that fair?
Sure. So
Can you just
I'm
provide
pretty
us
sure.
the current and via email, or if you have a hard copy of it by the end of the meeting, so that
To
we can
you,
review
or, yeah.
to us 3?
To the board.
I believe Sherry sent that to the board a couple months ago. But,
She did.
But obviously, David was not a part of that.
Right.
So I can send this out to you guys.
Perfect.
So I guess then we would expect to see that on the agenda for the next meeting, and then we can add amendments and craft the policy in a public space.
And so at this point, you don't want anything added to their folder because we don't know if it's going to
Well,
be.
we will, but we don't.
But not right now.
Correct.
I would like actually raise a point on that. So since we are in an election cycle, we have now begun one, people have already filed, and that document has not been included in those packets. It would stand to reason we would expect to be back in this place during filings in 23, because we have not initiated the new policy. So I would just keep that in mind as we cycle through this, to say that even if we voted on it and made it effective a certain date, we already are in an election cycle, and we may find ourselves here again. But we have a standing order, it seems, that we can at least cite. But
Right.
I would not expect this to be fully implemented until the next cycle, I guess is my point, because we're already in one.
Okay.
I thought I had requested, or we were looking at Marion County's policy. I don't remember how we started talking about that last month, but Marion County has that policy, and we were gonna see if maybe we could move closer to what they do.
I reviewed it.
Is that how it came up?
I believe so.
Okay.
I believe we just all kind of discussed that we were going to review it individually and see where we wanted to
Do
take
you
this
still
discussion.
have it? Would you
I
share
didn't.
that with the board?
I didn't print it off,
Okay.
so I don't have it. But it certainly, in terms of, the policy is quite simple. I mean, we just have these X, Y, and Z of what the consequences are for not. It's really, you either turn it in or you don't, and what is the repercussion for not. And so they just, essentially, they move up all of their numbers, in their order of operations, right? They fine upon the first instance, and then it somehow increases or drastically changes from there.
And I guess for me, there has to be I don't know where the line is. I guess it's where we draw it. But there has to be something, nobody wants to feel like they're walking away, they're put in handcuffs for not turning their CFA 4 in, but you also don't want your kindness mistaken for weakness when we have been so generous to notify all the candidates before it's due, have the deadlines included in the packet. The candidate packet is technically a courtesy, because it's up to the candidate to find out what they need to do to file. So don't want to discourage, but don't want to be mistaken for weak. And the whole reason my predecessor arranged for these meetings to come here is so that they would be taken seriously. And candidates would know that it was a very serious thing to not turn the required filings in. And so getting back to the seriousness without discouragement, I guess, is the line that I'd like to draw.
And I think for, just to take it into consideration, the idea that I have in my head is just essentially to eliminate number 2, right? That there's no second get out of jail free card. But I think it is something for all of us to consider if it is not currently posted and not handed out to candidates and will be in the future. I think that would be essentially number 1. Here is outside of going out and knowing the statutes on your own as a candidate. So I think that could even serve as number 1. So I think we do need to just take it under advisement and consideration for the next meeting. We will all 3 review the current policy again and just make changes or suggestions to it on the fly in the next public meeting. Is that fair?
Yes, I concur.
Okay.
In this here, they do say it's guidelines and not policy. Just, I don't know how strong you want to be on that, but I do want to add that we in the office kind of looked for other policies in other bigger counties, and we found one at St. Joe's, and we were like pretty impressed. Man, they had them down if they did this, and they actually went through the people, their names, and they find them and da-da-da-da-da-da. And I went, man, they're on task. And then at the very end, they said, and now we'll just let them all go. And they erased them all. So none of them had to pay anything, but it sounded like they were going to be really tough on everybody. And then, but I don't know if that was just their one meeting.
Right.
But so we're not the only ones that are probably kind of soft on some of these things, but.
Well, it will take a lot of burden off of the election board up here making decisions
Yes.
about the filings, because we will have something concrete. So let's move in that direction if you guys are okay. So I don't know that we even need to table anything because it's just a discussion. And if everyone's okay, if we don't have any other discussion on that, I can move on.
There is another candidate filing coming up, correct? The annual filing?
Yes, yes. I believe it's January 18, it's due. And we are getting some of them in, and it'll be their final for 2022. It's always a little confusing when you're just hearing that we're in 23, but it takes you to the end of the year of December of 2022. And I think I missed one thing on new business. I do have the IEC 22 that I need signatures from you all, and it's the county certification of voting system and electronic poll book inventory. This happens every year. So I have all of our e-poll books listed, their serial numbers, all the things they need. You just need to sign it, and then I fax that to VSTOP that keeps track of all of this. It's just another important thing that needs to be done, but I can have you sign that after the meeting.
Perfect. And I believe you've taken care of the registrations being held already. You discussed that.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Moving on. The next item on the agenda is Monroe County Democratic CFAs, and I think I'm deferring to Mr. Henry on that.
Actually, this isn't my agenda item, so
Who am I?
I believe we got something. Did we get an email from you?
Yes.
So I will defer to Karen.
You're waiting for me? What am I supposed to be doing?
it's regarding the Monroe County Democratic Party CFA question.
Okay, so there was some questions about whether or not that the Democrats filed on time, and I did not have them in my file. But since then, I have found out that they filed with the state, and I just didn't get a copy of it. I did not get a complimentary copy. which is not required. They don't have to do that.
So we have no issue.
So we're fine.
There's no filing issue.
Yeah, and to clarify, so the Monroe County Democratic Party, and of course I'm speaking in a different hat here, is a state political action committee under Indiana code. And so since 2021, we have filed our paperwork at the Indiana Election Division. And as that is where our CFAs are filed. And so as Karen had mentioned in the past, there have been opportunities to file courtesy copies locally, but that is a courtesy. But our party files up north as we function as a state PAC. So those documents are available through the Secretary of State's office. But I don't believe that was the only question that you had. You also had a question regarding 2019 CFAs. Is that correct?
Yes, so there was also, it's like, I have all this paperwork, and I know I have it in here, but right now I can't find it. The numbers didn't exactly match of when they had their ending to when they started on the next CFA 4. Again, when we didn't even get, no, they were the ones that we did get, and they were from 2019? Is that right, David?
I believe that's what you provided the board.
But when we receive them in our office, we do not do any math or checking on anybody's. We just accept them when they bring them in. So that was not exactly correct at that time. But even when I find it, I can't bring that up to anybody. It's not my job. So somebody else would have to see it, that it's been posted, and then they would have to complain about it. In the meantime, it looks like everything caught up and it looks fine, but it's not in my realm there of trying to decipher if it's correct or not. Does that make sense?
It does, I think. I just have a question, Karen. So you had said it was brought to, who had initiated the questions about the CFAs going back to 2019? Where did the request come from?
Where did it come from?
Yes.
I would say it came from Taylor.
So the Republican Party chair
Republicans.
had questions about CFAs going back to 2019?
Yes.
Okay. I would just add for the record that, and I know legal counsel's not here today, but our understanding under Indiana code is that the statute of limitations on amending a CFA is 2 years. And so in talking about items from 2019 and 2020, if I presume the question was about defects in those filings, we're well past any statute of limitations. And that makes sense, because if a campaign ran in 2019 and those folks moved away and retired to California, to go back and ask them to refile 4 or 5 years later doesn't quite make a lot of sense. So thank you for clarifying where the question came from, but from my seat, sounds like it's moot unless there's any other action that would need to be taken on those forms locally.
I would agree to that, since it has been filed with the state. I think that was the biggest thing, and since that is all okay. I think it was just confusing, since I always get a copy and then I didn't get a copy. But maybe
Well,
they
and
can.
I guess I'd say moving forward, we can evaluate filing a courtesy copy, but it is a courtesy, and it is on public record at the Secretary of State. And again, because we work in state PAC activities and supporting state candidates, that's where it's filed. So I'm glad to provide that clarification for you.
So
Easy enough.
I would think if the Republicans or anyone else wanted to say something, they would have to bring it up to the board. I feel like I'm kind of a go-between, but I'm not representing the Republicans or the Democrats, so.
It may be serviceable to have counsel here if this comes up again. But my understanding, and again, I'm not an attorney, is that the process would be that the board would have to find a defect in a filing that would then have to go out to the committee for either correction or the discussion about whether or not it's within the statute of limitations. So if there's a process to be initiated, I'm not seeing a process to initiate today unless the board has a different opinion, but that's it.
Good afternoon, Election Board. It's Molly from County Legal. I'm actually present. I'm just virtual today. And I'm happy to look into the statute of limitations and what process would that this would entail and notify the board.
Thank you, Molly. I appreciate it.
All right, great.
Okay. Sounds like we have, at this point, a solution to that agenda item. I do want, in the first draft of the agenda, I thought this was on there, but correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that first meeting of the year of the election board, we do need to vote on the consolidation of polling places. And I thought that was on here, but on some draft, but maybe I was just reading something different. Am I wrong? I just want to clarify that. And if we do need to make an amendment to the agenda to do that, I would entertain that as well.
Well, if we don't know the polling sites, then it's hard to make that resolution.
But isn't that resolution just allowing us to consolidate? And it's an annual resolution. And Molly, if you want to chime in on that, please do. But I believe that's what it is. I just don't want to miss anything.
Okay.
I thought it was on a draft agenda.
I was thinking that resolution had to list the precincts.
Wonderful.
I've been
So-
working on all these on my desk, but Molly, can you give an answer to that one?
I'm looking up the statute.
Okay.
Okay, while she's doing that, we can move on to the next item, which is public comments. I'll give the online forum a second to raise their hand and or chat something in. And then is there anyone in the audience that wishes to make a public comment? If so, please come to the podium, state your name, and you will be recognized.
Okay. I'm Ralph Shaw from the League of Women Voters. I just wanted to make sure, did I understand that you approved the calendar that was in the packet that you had? I didn't, or is that just still a suggestion?
Are you referring to the voting days and hours for the primary and the general?
That's right, yes.
I don't believe we did make a motion.
I don't know that we made a motion. We did sign it, though. I'll take that motion.
Motion to approve the calendar.
Second.
And roll call, Chairperson Garlitz?
Yes.
Board Member Henry?
Yes.
Clerk Brown?
Yes,
Motion approved, 3-0.
Thank
Is
you
that-
for bringing that to our attention.
thank you. Is that helpful?
Okay. And I don't see anything else on the chat, so with that,
I do have a resolution here, and it's Monroe County Election Board Order, consolidation of polling places for adjoining precincts. So I have it here if you want to sign it, if we don't need to have the actual poll sites and precincts combined.
which I think we need to wait just a second for legal
Right.
counsel to come back with an
So-
answer on that.
So I
But
have it.
I do know it needs to be done if we are going to go that direction. And my only question is, does it need to be done on the first meeting of the year? I don't know that.
I am not aware that it has to be done on the first meeting of the year. I believe it expires at the end of the year.
So it may not matter at this point,
Correct.
because we're not holding an election tomorrow, so.
And I concur with Ms. Brown. The statute that I'm reading right now doesn't prescribe when the polls have to be consolidated. It just has an expiration date.
Okay, so I have that. I have the expiration date of December 31st, 2023. Do we need to have the poll sites or just that they can sign the, well, it does, on here it says see attachment, and that is going to be the poll sites that are being consolidated.
I think you attached the poll sites to the resolution.
Okay, so then that's a moot point as well. Okay, any other comments? Next county election board meeting is February 2nd, 2023 at 1 p.m. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I will make a motion to adjourn.
A second?
Roll call, Chairperson Garlitz.
Yes.
Board Member Henry.
Yes.
Clerk Brown.
Yes.
Motion approved, 3-0.
Thank you.